Hello lovely humans, welcome to this space on the internet. So, if you're queer and happen to be very up to date in new queer media, you might have heard of the new TV series Heartstopper that was just released in the past few weeks, I think. Heartstopper is based off of a comic by Elle Argent, forgive me if I'm saying that wrong, who is also the author of the novel Loveless, which features an aro ace character and like her journey in realizing she's aro ace. And I think she also wrote a novel called Radio Silence with a demisexual character. So this is a very well-known queer author who wrote the comics, and now it's been developed into a TV series. And it's kind of all the rage because, at least in my opinion and the opinion of many other people, it's kind of exactly what we need for a variety of reasons. So I'm going to be talking about in this video what I thought of Heartstopper, things I just want to point out about different storylines and narrative and how the TV show was like produced aesthetically and all the things I like about it, things I'd be interested in seeing if they, and they should, create a second season. Let's get into it. Let's move on to sort of a brief description of each character so that if you haven't watched the show, you'll at least know what I'm talking about a little bit. And I do recommend you go watch the show because it's amazing. I love it. I love it. It's on Netflix. So, our main character, protagonist character, is Charlie. Charlie, in a few words, is sweet, kind, supportive, understanding, just really sweet. He's really sweet. He's also awkward, anxious, over-apologetic, that sort of character. He dresses like a bit of a grandpa in his school uniform and like knit jumpers and stuff. Yeah, he's really endearing. I am a fan of Charlie, as am I a fan of most of the characters in this show. Oh, and I should mention that Charlie is distinctly gay and has been out for some number of years. Second character, Nick, which is Charlie's love interest. And what I wrote here in my notes is that he gives Peeta Malark vibes, because he totally does. Him and Peeta are like very similar characters when you take them out of their story context. So Nick is like very easy to talk to, considerate, charismatic. They compared him to like a golden retriever in I think the first or second episode, which I thought was really fitting, and I also think that Peeta Malark kind of emits golden retriever vibes. They're just like really nice. Nick's so nice. Nick visually has sort of like a jock aesthetic. He is a bit of a jock. He plays on the school's rugby team, so it is a bit of a nerd meets jock love story, but that's part of the appeal in some ways, is that that's an archetype usually reserved for straight romances in TV. And now we're flipping that narrative to be not so straight romance, but still uphold the nerd meets jock archetype. And one thing I'm curious about going forward in the series, should they create more seasons, is whether Nick's like attitudes towards sports or his personal style will change in any way, or if it will remain largely the same, sort of as a result of learning more about himself and his identity. Nick comes to identify as bisexual by the end of the first season. Next is Tao. I have a lot of notes on Tao because I am Tao. I feel like I'm a lot of them, but maybe that's kind of what makes a good character, is the fact that I feel like I live inside of each of these characters and understand them so profoundly. But Tao, first of all, is hilarious. He's so funny. He's very loyal and protective. In the series, he's Charlie's sort of best friend and is very protective of Charlie, especially because Charlie is bullied a lot. Tao tends to stick up for him, and that's one of the main sort of premises of Tao's storyline. He's a little bit overdramatic, and I love it. That's part of his humor, I think. Also, I love his hair, especially since like hair doesn't show you a picture of his hair. Hair doesn't just whoop like that, so it makes me happy to imagine him like curling it, unless it does magically do that, I don't know, but I love his hair. Tao also has like excellent fashion sense in my opinion. I love his outfits. He's always wearing a hat, which I love. He's usually wearing some sort of like boldly patterned or colored jacket. One other thing I really loved about Tao was the fact that his character quirks were very consistent. So the fact that he loves movies, that was not necessarily like crucial to the plot in any direct way, but that remained consistent. He always wanted to have movie nights. He loved having movie nights. He wants to watch movies with his friends. He talks about movies. Like, loving movies was just part of Tao's character, and I thought that was a good addition. Also, the fact that he can't run is carried throughout the series, and I can relate as an asthmatic human with no coordination. Anyways, I loved his consistent character quirks. I also just related a lot to Tao, and I'll get more into his storyline later on, but I related to his storyline a lot too. One thing I thought was interesting is that Tao is like the comedic relief of the series. He's like the comedic relief slash best friend character. And I've noticed sort of a trend in media for this character, this particular character archetype, to be the gay friend as well. But Heartstopper seems to have flipped it, and Tao is the token straight friend, as he puts it, which I thought was hilarious. Go watch our Guess the Token Straight video if you haven't already. It's on TikTok, might be in our YouTube channel. Yeah, go watch it. But yeah, he's the token straight, in his words, and to have the straight friend be used as comedic relief, I think was a really strong choice. Mostly because gay people tend to be made into a bit of a joke just by existing, and that is sort of further perpetuated by the comedic relief best friend character. So I think Tao, the straight friend as comedic relief, was a really smart addition to the show. Next we have Elle. It's Elle. Elle is one of the friends amongst like Charlie, Tao, and then another friend I'm going to talk about named Isaac. They're sort of a group. They're their little nerd group, and Elle is amazing. I would say primarily Elle is like level-headed and logical and kind of no nonsense. Like, she doesn't want to be involved in any drama ever. She's very relaxed. She also has an impeccable fashion sense. She's often wearing overalls, which I love. Turtlenecks, also love. Sweaters, love. Mini skirts, and then like cool pattern tights. I love Elle's wardrobe. And like the way she does her hair is beautiful. I love her glasses. Everything about Elle. Elle's like queer role in the series is the fact that she is a trans girl, which I think is cool beans. We love Elle. The fourth friend of Charlie, Tao, Elle, and then Isaac. I love Isaac! Isaac, I know I'm saying I love all of these characters, but I might love Isaac the most. I don't know. I might love Isaac the most. Isaac is a very introverted human. He's quiet. He almost never speaks. He's a bookworm in the sense that he literally carries a book around everywhere with him. In every single scene in the movie, I think he's holding a book. Or has one like under his arm, or is reading one, or like in every scene. One of which, in the bowling alley, I believe, is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, which I thought was kind of funny. And then he also reads books on like gender studies and environment and stuff. That was just an amusing little detail. A few things about Isaac. He is confirmed by the writer, Alice Oseman, to be aroace, which we love. Not that it's explicitly stated in the series, but it is like pretty obvious in the sense that everyone else around him seems to have some sort of love interest, and he's like completely on the outside and just gives off aroace vibes. But I also think that aroace vibes tend to, I don't know, like, you can have one of those like Venn diagrams, you know? Tend to overlap with autistic vibes. They're very similar, which makes sense because a lot of autistics are aroace and vice versa. I read Isaac as autistic. I'm sure there's other people who did too. Like, it seemed pretty obvious, and I'm not sure if that was the intention of the author. I haven't found anything about it, or the intention of any of the producers or anything, but it seems obvious to me. And I'll tell you why, because I want to. So there's the fact that his facial expressions don't tend to necessarily like match the situation in the same way that a lot of the other characters do. He's always smiling. Always. Love it. He's very quiet, doesn't talk much. He seems to completely lack judgment. He's like so neutral and non-judgmental, which is very common in autistics, to just not interpret things beyond like the face value of what they are. That's not to mean that we're shallow in the slightest. The fact that he lacks that sort of judgment seemed to be a lot of his character. his unconventional fashion choices. He's always wearing sweaters with daisies on them. I love Isaac. He stands out in that sense a little bit, in the best way. And he also stims. He like, I've watched it a few times now and there's like some scenes where he bounces. Like, he bounces. And I think I saw a scene with him carrying around like a fidget toy, like a stim toy, and that just made me so happy. I think Isaac is excellent autistic representation, and I definitely read him that way. And in terms of Isaac's character, he's just really kind and considerate, and also quite funny. He has a good sense of humor in a more subtle way. He's a vibe. Isaac is a vibe, and I want to swim in the vibe all the time. Next is Darcy. Darcy is another one of the characters, not one of the like main friend group, but sort of like a new addition to the friend group. Her and her girlfriend are those kind of new additions. Darcy is blunt, no nonsense, very loud. She seems like someone who as a kid would have been told that she was like a lot, but that's who she is. So she's a loud and proud lesbian. So yeah, she's very vocal about being queer. She's one of the characters who has been out for some unspecified amount of time. And she's also a bit of like a gay icon, like the gay mother of the group. She, like Charlie, was an interesting character to follow in terms of their outness, because she is like sure of her identity to an extent, has been out for a substantial length of time. Like coming out or realizing her identity as a lesbian has like basically nothing to do with her storyline, though she's a side character and doesn't have like that much of a storyline anyways. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting choice. She has a consistently quirky fashion sense. I think she wears the same like tie-dye hoodie in a few episodes, which reminds me of my brother and makes me really happy. She has like bleached hair, and like immediately when I saw bleached hair I was like, you giving me lesbian vibes. That's just like kind of immediately what I got from her. And she tends to sport some pretty bold patterns. Because we're not shown a lot of like Darcy's life in the show, in the first season at least, I like to imagine that she probably has a pretty interesting backstory or more to come. Darcy also has quite a few one-liners that, once again, iconic. She was messaging a group chat and says, "We are such meddling gays and I love it," and that made me smile. And then also her and her girlfriend are kissing in a locked room that they've been locked into, and their friends are looking for them, and then the friends find them while they're kissing, and she just goes homophobia. She yells homophobia, which I think peak gay humor. And that's Darcy for you. Next is her girlfriend Tara, who is also a side character. She's sort of the in into the friendship group because Elle goes to school with Tara and Darcy and sort of befriends Tara first. But Tara is very like friendly and welcoming. She also has a pretty cute aesthetic. She had like cute barrettes and like light pinks. I think she's a little bit more subtle, but she's just kind of a kind human. She has a more in-depth storyline of her own, as opposed to Darcy, that I will touch on in a bit. And finally, Tori. Tori is like really a side character. She doesn't have many lines at all, but I love her. I read somewhere that she is also aro ace, which once again, someone can give off aro ace vibes, and someone can also give off autistic vibes, and they're kind of one and the same, but we're not gonna go into that with Tori just yet. But Tori is Charlie's older sister, who's just really supportive of him, and she kind of has the motif of appearing out of nowhere and scaring Charlie and being totally deadpan and not having any facial expressions. And I love her. I just wanted to mention her because Tori is the best. The visuals within the TV series. This involves how different scenes are constructed, cinematography, costuming, and such. So in the cover of the TV series, we see the two main characters, Charlie and Nick, on like yellow and turquoise background. And if you watch the show, it'll become very evident to you that turquoise and yellow were very featured colors. I'm saying this and I feel like I should have like some sort of profound reason as to why those were the two very specific colors that are in every single scene within the TV series, but I don't have any commentary on it other than that I noticed it, and I think the contrast, and they're both very like lively colors, was, I don't know, I think it was a good choice. Some examples of this are the school in the opening scene of the TV series in episode 1 is primarily blue and yellow. Nick and Charlie have a scene where they kiss in the rain under an umbrella. That scene features both turquoise and yellow colors. There's just a lot of blue and turquoise, and this use of color was pleasing to the eye, in my opinion. It was very bright, lively, and happy. And I think that's one of the main focuses in commentary on the Heartstopper TV series, is that usually in queer media, we don't get just a happy story. We get some sort of tragedy in one form or another, but Heartstopper really features just a happy little high school romance. Another thing to do with the visuals, use of color in this TV series is the fact that they seem to have rainbows at every possible opportunity. If you just look for rainbows in scenes, I think that'd be a fun game. And then there's obviously one scene where Darcy and Tara kiss and it's rainbows everywhere, and that was a really cool moment. However, I do think that the kissing scenes were a little bit drawn out for my taste, but it's okay. It's fine. And then there's also the bisexual lighting, that being blue, purple, pink, which is a pretty neutral palette on its own, but paired with the fact that Nick, one of the main characters, is coming to realize that he is bisexual, it becomes a little bit more relevant. Okay, so more about cinematography, camera angles, how scenes were staged. I just want to say that I think one of the main reasons that the cinematography in this series appeals to me so much is because it was adapted from a comic. Comics tend to focus in on small scenes that convey the most information possible. That's how kind of comics work, or else you wouldn't know what was going on, right? I actually can't read comics. I find it very difficult, but that's me. The storyboard's already drawn out when you're adapting from a comic, and I think that worked in the show's favor. One other thing that Heartstopper benefits from having been adapted from a comic is the fact that there's just a bit of an artistic appeal. It originated from the idea of a comic and drawing and art, and that's sort of integrated to how the show is pieced together. For example, one of my favorite little camera shots is when Nick and Charlie are in the back room at, I don't remember his name, the bully's birthday party, where they have their first kiss, and Charlie just nudges his foot over a little bit, and it's just a shot on their shoes, and I found that to be just really adorable. And there's lots of little moments like that within Heartstopper. One thing that I really enjoyed about the visual aspect of the show were the little animations. There were leaves and hearts and sparkles and neon lights and stuff that were just little drawn animations that would do whatever they would on the scene. Maybe this is just a me thing, but because body language isn't an inherent thing that I understand, the fact that oh, two characters are crushing on one another when they look at each other, little heart pops or whatever, or a circle goes around them of leaves, that happens a few times, conveying that unity, or something flowing between them, that being visual, was awesome in my opinion. I just really enjoyed those. And then they're also just really cute. One of my favorite use of the animations also included some sound effects. It was where I think Charlie's asleep and Nick is trying to hold his hand, and he gets close and then he feels the sparks, and there's some yellow spark animations, and he pulls away. He does it again, and feeling that spark. That's another thing that comics do well, is that they convey a feeling through some sort of visual representation. I think Heartstopper did that really well with the use of animations, and that was one of my favorite scenes. And my final sort of sub-point under the idea of the visuals of Heartstopper are the sets. They're all kind of quintessential, whimsical, very idealized, which really worked with the tone of the entire series, it being about a somewhat idealized queer youthhood? I want to say youthhood. But yeah, it worked well with the story. So for example, they go to the milkshake stand, and I don't know, I know the idea of milkshake diners is it's a thing among people my age, at least. It's a vibe. They also have their birthday party in this beautiful mansion. There's the arcade / bowling alley with all the neon lights, and there's, in the final episode, Nick and Charlie are on a beach. Then they have a snow day, and then also, maybe less important per se, but all of the characters had the most aesthetically pleasing bedrooms. They all had like some form of like fairy light or neon light. Everything about the lighting in this series actually is gorgeous. And at least in my case, I find that's a trend in shows that I really like. For example, I've mentioned Please Like Me, an Australian TV show, one of my favorite shows ever. It also has sort of similar cinematography, sort of a similar premise in some ways. It's somewhat whimsical, a little bit quirky, but the lighting is just so gorgeous, and that just like improves every movie or TV show by a few notches for me. Let's move on to some of like the romances, the love stories. So first we have Nick and Charlie. I love them, ship them, sweetest pair ever. I adore them in every possible way. They seem to have a genuine care for one another. I think this was a theme throughout the series, is the fact that all of the couples are really good friends, which I think is the reality for a lot of people in high school. But yeah, they are very good friends and have a genuine care for one another. This manifests in various ways, such as each other's interest in the other's activities. For example, Charlie joins rugby to play rugby with Nick because Nick plays rugby, even though it's not really his thing. And then reversely, Nick goes to Charlie's concert to support him because Charlie does band. And even though Nick is terrible playing drums, he wants to support Charlie. In continuation of this idea of supporting one another, Charlie is wholly, completely supportive of Nick's journey in discovering his own queer identity and never pressures him to come out in any way, shape, or form. There's one scene where Nick asks to keep the nature of their relationship sort of a secret while Nick is sort of figuring things out. He says that he's not really ready to come out as anything yet, and Charlie is very mature and understanding of this. I think he even smiles in the scene. Later, the same scene replays in Nick's head because Nick seems to be carrying around a lot of guilt for needing to keep the relationship a secret. So when Nick remembers this scene, he imagines it with Charlie looking sad and disappointed and hurt by this. And this is a common theme for Nick, is that he seems to feel really bad for Charlie when he knows that in Charlie's previous relationship with another character named Ben, that was largely negative, Ben would always keep their relationship a secret and never wanted to tell anybody, and then would just kiss Charlie in secret and never talk to him until he wanted to kiss a boy again. So it seems as though Nick recognized how that relationship with Ben hurt Charlie and feels really guilty for sort of seemingly subjecting Charlie to the same idea of not being able to be open about his relationships despite the fact that Charlie has been out for a while. So it's quite evident within that sort of enveloping storyline that Nick really does care for Charlie and his feelings. I'll touch on Nick and Charlie's first kiss. I love this scene. It's amazing. Afterwards though, Nick sort of gets up after hearing one of his like rugby jock friends shout for him and just runs away and leaves Charlie, which is one of those things that he looks back on and feels really bad because he doesn't want Charlie to feel ashamed in any way. And this is a common theme, Nick being scared or confused and then making choices that he later regrets, such as when he agrees to go on a date with Imogen when he really likes Charlie. One really fantastic thing about Heartstopper is that every single time Nick realizes this and takes responsibility and apologizes for his actions. Also, in terms of Nick and Charlie's relationship, every single one of their hugs is like magic. It's like honey oozing in the sunlight. It's the most adorable, most comforting thing ever. I love every single one of their hugs. So if you watch it, I'm curious to know if you feel the same way about every time they hug, there's just something really special about it. Also, I am a sucker for dramatic irony. Such a sucker for dramatic irony. It is my favorite thing in a storyline. So the fact that in Nick and Charlie's relationship we get this dramatic irony throughout the series fills me with little happy bubbles. So for example, there's the irony first of them crushing on one another for the first like 2 or 3 episodes, and not knowing that the other likes them back necessarily, maybe suspecting it, but that dramatic irony of them not knowing how the other feels, love it. And then once they do sort of recognize their feelings for one another mutually, there's the irony of them secretly being together, nobody else knowing. So things like how they hold hands under the table, or at the cinema, or movie theater if you're American or Canadian. Or how they touch each other's arms in public and it's like bordering on quite suspicious, but they can get away with it. Or such as in the arcade when they sort of kiss. They do kiss, but they're out of everybody else's eye line even though it is a very public space. I love those moments of like secrecy. There's something about them. You know, have any of you guys had like those bubble tea bubbles that are like, they're called popping bubbles I think, and they have that little like membrane and then you pop it, it's like kind of like a fruit sugar juice thing. I like the lychee ones. It's kind of like that feeling of when you pop them in your mouth, except it's like all over my body. Dramatic irony makes me feel like a bunch of little popping bubbles are exploding inside of me. I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, I'm a sucker for dramatic irony. Elle and Tao, while not explicitly in a romantic relationship, in fact, I don't think they're in a romantic relationship, they're like best friends. And that seems to be where the storyline is certainly going. We're explicitly told that Elle has a crush on Tao, and while Tao isn't very direct in confessing any sort of crush on Elle, it's sort of implied, I think. Elle and Tao's relationship is one of opposites attract. Elle is very level-headed, calm, anti-drama, whereas Tao is somewhat temperamental. He's really goofy, very overdramatic, and prone to drama, and I think that works for them. You often see scenes where Tao will do some sort of goofy thing and sort of like reel Elle into his humor, even though that's not something she would do. And I think those scenes are really sweet. And they function well as a pair of friends as well. Like, I would not be disappointed in the slightest if they don't actually end up dating, because I think their friendship is beautiful. They also complement one another nice aesthetically, and overall they seem to be really comfortable and safe around one another, being best friends. I just love seeing that sort of relationship. Then we have Tara and Darcy, our Heartstopper lesbians. Tara and Darcy similarly are best friends, and they actually explicitly say this within the show's script. They talk about how the reason they think that they're such a good couple is because they're very good friends first. And theirs is also a relationship of opposites attract to, in a way. Tara's pretty like low-key, calm, like sort of mainstream in a sense, like she kind of gets along with everybody, whereas Darcy, I imagine, doesn't really get along with that many people because she's a bit of a spitfire, but they do complement one another nicely and are supportive of each other, just like all of the other couples in the series. Let's talk about each character's sort of storyline. We'll start with Charlie's protagonist storyline. So one thing that is super exciting about Charlie's storyline as the gay protagonist is that his story isn't about him figuring out his sexuality. It isn't about him discovering that he's gay, which is the usual gay male protagonist storyline that we get. Instead, it's been long established that he's gay. There are stories or similar sort of TV series and films where there are gay characters who are established as gay. Going into it, there isn't any sort of like self-discovery involved, such as like Eric in Sex Education, Otis's best friend, but again, Eric isn't a main character, he's the gay best friend, whereas Charlie is a gay male protagonist who's just sure of himself. That's just how he is. The story doesn't focus on it. And similarly, Charlie's story of how he was bullied and how he developed his certain like anxious tendencies that he demonstrates within the timeline of the series, all of that has already happened, and we're just seeing like the after effect of how it impacts his character, which I thought was really interesting and didn't take away from the series at all. So overall, I thought it was really refreshing to have a queer protagonist who from the get-go is secure in their identity, and that's not the focus of the series. Charlie also already has sort of a pre-established support system. When it comes to his bullying, he has a teacher that's on his side. He has Tao, who often defends him. And even though the bullying is persistent within the series, it's very clear that Charlie has a support system. Next, there's Nick's bisexual storyline, that being him discovering his identity as a bisexual guy. So let's start off by saying the number of times that Nick says the words confused or I don't know is actually hilarious. He emits raging bisexual vibes, and he goes through the characteristic like, am I gay test googling. He gets 62% homosexual. He listens to a bisexual YouTube video creator, get a sense of these different sort of identities and where he falls within queerness. Something that Nick does in his self-discovery is ask Charlie how he knew he was gay, and Nick doesn't seem invalidated in the least when his experience differs drastically from Charlie's, which I think is a healthy thing to see because everybody's experience will be different. I don't know, I think it's an important narrative to show people discovering themselves like sort of after the fact, and then there's some people like Charlie who explicitly state like being gay was something that was just sort of an innate part of him throughout his entire life. And of course that means different things in different developmental periods, but that was just something he always sort of knew about himself. One thing that I really enjoyed about Nick's discovery storyline is something that it was lacking, and that is internalized homophobia. Because I think oftentimes in like queer discovery stories, there is a lot of internalized homophobia, and part of the discovery process is literally just people getting over the fact that like they never thought they were going to be gay, like, and that's somehow like a bad thing. Like I get maybe some shock factor, but a lot of the time characters will be working through like some sort of innate dislike for or beef with gayness, and Nick doesn't seem to do that. So his journey is one of self-discovery without the same shame surrounding like coming to terms with one's sexuality, which yeah, I think is rare in queer characters, for it to be purely about, oh my gosh, I'm confused, I need to figure this out maybe, as opposed to like, oh, I have the sinful the sinful thoughts of homosexuality or something of a less extreme nature, but the idea that your experience is bad and you have to work through it in order to accept it. Nick's story wasn't one of acceptance, it was one of understanding. So Nick has this one dynamic with Tara and Darcy specifically, where he sort of observes their relationship and how happy they are together in a same gender couple. It's really wholesome and adorable because he'll just watch Darcy and Tara being gay and happy, and you can sort of see him just really appreciate that they can have that, and also simultaneously having sort of an internal revelation of I could have that too. But they don't take away from one another. It's not any form of jealousy on Nick's part. It's just pure wholesome gayness. And finally, Nick's bi-realization journey seems to bring him more joy than grief, which is awesome to see, especially since he's a jock character, and it seems to be a really positive development for him in most ways, which is really lovely to see. Again, it's capitalizing on this idea that being queer isn't a tragedy. In fact, it can be a really positive thing. So next is Elle's new kid at school storyline. So Elle moves to the girls' school after her transition, but she doesn't really have any friends off the bat and doesn't seem too keen on making any, and is sort of lonely. Like Charlie and Darcy, Elle is already like firm in her queerness going into the show. Her story doesn't revolve around her being trans, she just is. So Elle's struggle with making friends and being a new kid wasn't like very deeply explored in the series. She was less of a central character in that sense, where her story didn't take prevalence, it was her impact with other people's storylines. But I think her neutrality could be taking a bit of a toll on her. I'm curious to see where her storyline goes in any future seasons, and would really love to see Elle's character further develop and to get to see more of her. One important implication of Elle's storyline is the fact that she was less willing, such as in the case of her crush on Tao, to make any major moves or changes in her life, having already dealt with a great deal of change in recent times before the timeline of the series starts. So she transitioned. That's one hell of a change, I would think. And then moved schools. Her friends are sort of evolving with her, around her as well. I think it would be interesting to see if Elle, a very like cool, patient, level-headed person, eventually sort of bends or breaks under the pressure of the built-up drama around her. Next is Tara's story, and that is that of her publicly coming out. So Tara isn't like out at the beginning, she's sort of in the process of coming out throughout the season, and one action she takes in particular is making an Instagram post about her and her relationship with Darcy. Tara is really weighed down by people's negative reactions to her coming out, by this stereotypical, awful, misogynistic commentary. And I think that her story is probably a really good representation of what it's like to be in the public eye as a queer person, and more specifically as a lesbian. For example, we see the difference between the external reaction of Tara versus Charlie being out. Charlie deals with like regular in-person harassment and bullying, whereas Tara, Tara, was more the victim of cyberbullying, online hatred, as well as more like implicit real-time cruelty. Things weren't as explicit, but were very specific to her identity as a lesbian. Things like saying she's too pretty to be a lesbian, it was a waste because she was so attractive, all these sort of disgusting comments. And finally, we have Tao's storyline. Oh, I love Tao. I love Tao. I've, in my notes, labeled this the Tao's beef with Nick's storyline. It's not limited to that, but that's a big part of it. And I just want to say that I really related to Tao and his particular storyline in this first season, because what he's dealing with is seeing a lot of his friends change, and his friend group is moving around and evolving, and they don't do the same things anymore. They're not in their regular routine of hanging out every Saturday or whatever and watching a movie, because he loves watching movies. He's not used to all of this change and sort of has a resultant fear of abandonment and dislike of changes. And I know that it's like incredibly overwhelming to feel as though you are the only solid piece in your life, like everything else is moving around you. So I guess I really empathized with Tao's story and think it's probably a bit of an underrated story because he's such a goofy character. It can be written off as a little bit like ridiculous or like unreasonable, but I don't think it was unreasonable at all. Particularly because Tao puts his entire like self into his friendships, arguably more so than any other character in the series. He's very loyal to his friends and puts a lot of energy and effort and value in his friendships. So I think his sentiment of being underappreciated are reasonable because I don't think the other characters have that same sort of unwavering commitment that feels like so whole. It's like all of your being. I might be projecting onto Tao, to be honest, but I think that it is reasonable of him to feel underappreciated in this instance because I think a lot of people don't experience friendship the same way that Tao does, and I really relate to that. So in one particular scene where Tao sort of like breaks down to Charlie after like a fight at the school grounds, it was touching. Tao, like throughout the series, even when he's upset, he approaches everything with like some sense of humor. Like everything's a bit of a joke. But in this one scene, there was no joke to it. He was genuinely hurt and there was no way to spin it into something comedic. But him and Charlie are on good terms after they sort of talk it through and then they hug. I think they hug, yeah. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about friendship in the show because this was one of the major themes, which I think was intentional. Like I said, the fact that these couples in the series are all basically like best friends turned couples seems really true to life from my perspective, and friendship was a really key element in the series. The relationships and friendships between all of the characters involved were really nicely portrayed. Again, it's one of those things that fills me with like little lychee popping bubbles. That sense of friendship is really beautiful, so I think that makes it just a really heartwarming experience to watch. And I also think that it was good representation of teenagers because I think friendships are probably one of the most important aspects of a lot of teenagers' lives, probably more so than any sort of romantic relationship. Friendship is a really important aspect, and I love all. I am now obsessed with this series. I have watched it like 3 times through now. I love it. And I love the queer representation. I think it's really well done. I think that the show itself is creative and like well developed, and the actors, the cast overall is amazing. I want to wrap this show in one of like the hugs. Okay, every single hug in this series is freaking amazing. So if you haven't watched Heartstopper, I do recommend you watch it. It's on Netflix. I certainly enjoyed it. I know it's kind of all the rage in this moment, and I really hope that they make a second season and then a third season because it's become so dear to me in such a short amount of time, and I think it's really special for a piece of media to do that. Thank you to the creators of Heartstopper. Okay, lovely humans, that is all I have for you today on Heartstopper. We'll see you next time in this space in the internet. Okay, bye!